The streets of New York City were quieter than usual that crisp autumn evening. Amara Thompson, a 32-year-old African-American woman, stepped out of the Metropolitan Museum of Art after hosting a lecture on ancient civilizations. As a historian and curator, her days were filled with artifacts and curious minds, but her nights held a secret, one known to very few. Amara was no ordinary historian. She was Agent Nightshade, an elite operative for a government task force that handled national security threats discreetly. Amara walked briskly toward her car, her heels clicking rhythmically on the pavement. She enjoyed this part of her day, the solitude and calm after hours of public speaking. But tonight, the calm shattered. "Hey, lady!" a gruff voice echoed from behind her. Amara turned her head slightly and saw three men stepping out of the shadows. They were in their mid-20s, with slouched postures and hardened expressions. Amara didn't need to hear their words to sense their intent. Years of field training had sharpened her instincts. "Where you headed so late?" one of them jeered, his tone unfriendly. Amara stopped walking, standing tall. "Home," she said, her voice calm and even. "Is there something you need?" The men exchanged glances, their confidence emboldened by her quiet demeanor. "Yeah," the tallest of them said, stepping forward. "That purse. And maybe we'll take some company, too. You shouldn't be out here alone, you know." Amara's expression remained neutral. She had no fear, but she knew the importance of handling such situations carefully. Using unnecessary force could draw attention, and her cover as a simple historian would be at risk. "I suggest you walk away," Amara said evenly, her dark eyes meeting theirs. "This isn't worth it." The men laughed, mistaking her warning for weakness. "Oh, we've got ourselves a tough one," one mocked, moving closer. The moment he reached for her arm, Amara acted. In a flash, she grabbed his wrist and twisted, forcing him to stumble forward. Before the others could react, she sidestepped and planted a controlled elbow strike to the leader's chest, knocking him backward. The second man lunged at her, but she swept his legs from under him with a swift kick, sending him to the ground without causing serious harm. Amara stepped back, her stance poised but non-threatening. "You're done," she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. The men scrambled to their feet, shock and anger on their faces. But they also realized the truth. She wasn't someone to mess with. Muttering curses under their breath, they turned and disappeared into the night. Amara exhaled slowly, lowering her guard. Her hands trembled slightly from the adrenaline, though her expression remained composed. She hadn't injured them beyond bruises. There was no need. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone, quickly dialing a secure line. "This is Agent Nightshade," she said quietly, keeping her voice low in the empty street. "3 suspects attempted an attack. I neutralized the threat without injury. Recommend monitoring this area for future incidents." "Copy that," a voice responded on the other end. "You good?" "Always," Amara replied, hanging up. As she walked toward her car, her mind lingered on the encounter. Random crime wasn't unusual in the city, but something about their actions felt deliberate, almost targeted. Amara had learned to trust her instincts over the years, and tonight they whispered of something more. Her work as an agent was far from over. If there was a rising pattern of violence in the area, she'd be ready. Amara got into her car and started the engine, her reflection staring back at her in the rearview mirror. To the world, she was a historian, a scholar buried in books and lectures. But in the shadows, she was a protector, a warrior trained to keep those same streets safe. "Let's see where this leads," she murmured to herself, before driving off into the night. The following morning, Amara Thompson sat in her office at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a steaming cup of coffee in her hand. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating shelves of books and artifacts that surrounded her workspace. To the outside world, she was just Amara, the dedicated historian with an encyclopedic knowledge of ancient civilizations. Her colleagues admired her calm presence and intellect, never suspecting the life she led after hours. But today, Amara's mind lingered on the events of the previous night. She had replayed the encounter several times, analyzing every detail. Three men, seemingly random, yet something about their behavior felt off. It wasn't just petty crime, it had felt too deliberate. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Her assistant, Daniel Ramirez, poked his head in. "Morning, Amara. You've got someone waiting in the gallery. Wants to speak to you about the new exhibit." Amara smiled warmly. "Thanks, Daniel. I'll be right there." As Amara made her way to the Egyptian gallery, her phone buzzed subtly in her pocket, a coded signal only a select few would recognize. Priority alert. Her pulse quickened. She glanced around to make sure no one was watching before stepping into a side hallway. Pulling out her phone, she unlocked the secure app. A brief message appeared. "Nightshade. Report to HQ immediately. Level 3 priority." Amara's brow furrowed. Level 3 alerts were serious, urgent enough to pull her away from her civilian cover, but not yet a full-scale emergency. She made a quick call to Daniel. "Can you reschedule the meeting? Something urgent just came up." "Sure thing," Daniel said. "Everything okay?" "Yeah. I just need to take care of something," she replied smoothly. Within the hour, Amara arrived at an inconspicuous building on the edge of Brooklyn, an old warehouse that housed the covert headquarters for the Division of National Security and Covert Operations, DNSCO. The agency operated in absolute secrecy, tasked with handling threats that required precision, discretion, and deniability. Inside, Amara's commanding officer, Director Samuel Pierce, waited in the central briefing room. He was a tall, silver-haired man with sharp blue eyes and an air of authority. The walls were lined with monitors displaying news feeds, satellite imagery, and agency data. "Nightshade," Pierce said, gesturing for her to sit. "We've picked up something troubling." Amara took her seat, her expression serious. "What's happening?" Pierce pulled up a screen showing surveillance footage, grainy but clear enough to see. The timestamp was from last night. The footage showed Amara's encounter with the three men. Amara tensed. "You were tracking me." "No, not intentionally," Pierce said. "One of our anonymous tip lines flagged the area for suspicious activity, reports of escalating hate crimes in that neighborhood. We've seen an organized group moving through multiple boroughs, targeting minorities. What happened to you wasn't random." Amara's jaw tightened. "They're testing the waters." "Exactly," Pierce said. He zoomed in on the face of one of the attackers. "We've identified this one. Kevin Rhodes, low-level enforcer for a group calling itself the Cleansing Order." Amara's eyebrows arched. "The Cleansing Order? Haven't heard that name before." "They're new, but dangerous. They're masking themselves as a local hate group, but we suspect there's something deeper going on. Organized funding, recruitment, and weapons shipments. Someone's backing them." Amara leaned forward. "What's our next move?" Pierce handed her a file. "We need you to infiltrate their operations. We've flagged a known hangout, an old auto shop on the outskirts of Queens. Your objective is simple: gather intel, confirm their leadership structure, and get out unseen." Amara flipped through the file. Images, maps, and details were meticulously laid out. "Understood. When do I move?" "Tonight," Pierce said firmly. "We need eyes on them before this escalates further." Amara stood, her posture resolute. "I'll handle it." "Nightshade," Pierce called as she turned to leave. "Be careful. We don't know how deep this runs yet." Amara nodded, her expression steely. "I always am." That evening, Amara suited up in her tactical gear, sleek, black, and designed for stealth. Her equipment included a concealed communication earpiece, lightweight tools for infiltration, and a small, non-lethal weapon arsenal. As a government agent, Amara operated under strict rules. Deadly force was a last resort. The auto shop loomed ahead, its broken neon sign flickering dimly. The building was quiet, but a single truck was parked in the shadows, its engine still warm. Amara crouched low, observing. Through her earpiece, a voice crackled. Her handler, Agent Harris. Nightshade, you're clear to enter. Be advised. Heat signatures indicate at least 4 individuals inside. Copy that, Amara whispered. Moving like a shadow, she slipped through a side entrance, picking the lock with practiced ease. Inside, the shop smelled of oil and rust. She could hear voices coming from a back room, male, agitated, and loud. Carefully, Amara crept closer, pressing herself against the wall to listen. I told you we need more people, one voice said angrily. The boss wants results, and fast. If we don't handle this city, someone else will. We'll get it done, another replied. We've got new shipments coming in. Weapons, too. Once we spread out, no one's gonna stop us. Amara's stomach turned. Weapons shipments. This was worse than she thought. If they were planning something big, time was running out. Suddenly, the floor creaked under her weight. What was that? A voice barked. Amara cursed silently and slipped back into the shadows. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate. Her hand hovered near her stun baton, ready for action. The door swung open, and a burly man stepped into the hallway, scanning the darkness. Before he could react, Amara struck, swift and silent. She disarmed him and delivered a controlled blow to his side, sending him to the ground, unconscious. Harris, she whispered, I've confirmed weapons plans. Send backup for extraction. This place is a front. Copy that, Harris replied. Units are en route. Get clear. As Amara turned to leave, she heard shouts from the back room. Her cover was blown. The sound of boots pounding against the concrete echoed through the shop as the others gave chase. Amara sprinted toward the exit, her movements fluid and precise. A man lunged at her from the side, but she ducked, using his momentum against him to send him crashing into a workbench. Another grabbed a crowbar and swung, but she sidestepped and delivered a kick to his knee, dropping him instantly. Adrenaline surged through her veins as she burst through the side door into the cool night air. The sound of sirens grew louder in the distance. Backup had arrived. Amara disappeared into the shadows just as the first patrol cars skidded to a stop in front of the auto shop. She watched from a rooftop nearby as the suspects were rounded up and taken into custody. Her earpiece buzzed. Nice work, Nightshade, Harris said. We'll take it from here. Amara exhaled, her heart still racing. The operation had revealed more than she expected. The cleansing order wasn't just a threat. They were preparing for something catastrophic. This is far from over, Amara muttered to herself, disappearing into the night. Amara sat on her small balcony the next morning, a cup of black coffee steaming in her hands. The crisp air was a welcome contrast to the chaos of the previous night's mission. She'd barely managed to infiltrate the cleansing order's hideout and escape unscathed. Yet her findings lingered in her mind. Weapons shipments, organized leadership, growing numbers. The group wasn't just a random band of low-level criminals. They were something far more dangerous. Her phone buzzed on the small table beside her. A secure message lit up the screen. Briefing in 1 hour. HQ. Priority update. Amara sighed and sipped her coffee. Rest, it seemed, was a luxury she couldn't afford. At the Division of National Security and Covert Operations, DNSCO headquarters, Director Samuel Pierce waited at the head of the briefing table. Several agents sat alongside Amara, including her handler, Agent Harris, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a talent for spotting patterns. Nightshade, Pierce began as the room settled. Your infiltration last night confirmed our suspicions. The cleansing order isn't just a fringe hate group. They're stockpiling weapons, coordinating in several cities, and expanding fast. Our intelligence now suggests they're receiving outside funding and resources. Amara frowned. Outside funding. From who? Harris leaned forward, sliding a dossier across the table. That's what we're here to find out. We've intercepted encrypted communications linking the group to a businessman named Vincent Carrington. Publicly, Carrington is a philanthropist with real estate investments across New York and the Midwest. Privately, we believe he's funneling money into extremist networks to serve his own agenda. Amara scanned the file, Carrington's sharp, calculated face staring back at her from a glossy photo. What's his angle? Pierce replied gravely. Carrington thrives on chaos. Extremist movements create instability, drive down property values, and allow him to scoop up real estate for pennies on the dollar. We suspect he's orchestrating a larger event to deepen racial and social divides in the city. Amara's hands tightened on the file. She knew men like Carrington, powerful, untouchable on the surface, but corrupt to their core. So what's the plan? She asked. Pierce gestured to the screens at the front of the room where maps and surveillance images flickered to life. Carrington's hosting a private fundraiser at his estate tomorrow night in Westchester County. It's invitation only, filled with politicians, social elites, and likely his key operatives. Nightshade, you'll go undercover to gather intel, find proof of his involvement, identify his contacts, and if possible, disrupt his network. Amara nodded, already shifting into mission mode. How do I get in? Your cover, Harris said, sliding over a golden invitation, is as Dr. Amara Thompson, the historian. Carrington's estate has a renowned art collection, and as luck would have it, he's hosting an exhibit at the fundraiser. You'll use your professional credentials to gain access. Amara smirked faintly. So, I'm playing myself? Essentially, Pierce said with a hint of a smile. We're also equipping you with a small set of tools, a disguised earpiece, a signal disruptor, and a pen with a micro camera. Keep it clean, Nightshade. No unnecessary risks. Amara closed the file. Understood. I'll be ready. The next evening, Amara arrived at the Carrington estate in a sleek black dress that was both elegant and practical. Her heels, though stylish, were custom designed for agility, a subtle modification from DNSKO's tech team. She stepped out of her car and handed the keys to a valet, her sharp eyes scanning the sprawling mansion and its expansive grounds. The estate was abuzz with activity. Guests in tuxedos and gowns mingled on the front lawn beneath twinkling lights, champagne flutes in hand. Security guards flanked the entrance, their earpieces glinting in the glow of lanterns. Amara walked confidently up the marble steps, her invitation in hand. At the door, a burly guard gave her a once-over before nodding and stepping aside. Dr. Thompson, he said, welcome to the Carrington estate. Thank you, Amara replied smoothly, her voice calm and composed. Inside, the mansion was breathtaking. Polished floors, gilded chandeliers, and priceless art adorning every wall. Soft classical music played in the background as servers weaved through the crowd, balancing trays of hors d'oeuvres. Amara moved seamlessly, smiling politely and offering short exchanges with the city's elite. Through her concealed earpiece, Harris's voice crackled. You're in. Cameras show 2 security teams rotating in shifts. Watch for VIPs near Carrington. They're likely key players. Amara took a glass of champagne for show and drifted toward the main gallery. As she admired a painting, a Renaissance piece with sweeping brushstrokes, she caught sight of Vincent Carrington himself. He was exactly as his file described. Tall, silver-haired, and impeccably dressed, his confidence radiating through the room. He stood near a small group of men, speaking in low tones. Amara activated the micro camera hidden in her pen, angling it subtly toward the group. Their conversation was muffled, but Carrington's gestures were animated, and the other men nodded in agreement. Stay on him, Harris murmured. We need audio confirmation. Amara slowly circled the room, positioning herself closer to the group without drawing attention. As she passed a large sculpture, a fragment of their conversation reached her ears. "Shipment will arrive in 3 days. The docks in Queens. Make sure the order's ready. This city won't know what hit it." Amara's blood ran cold. A shipment. 3 days. Queens. She tapped her pen discreetly, transmitting the information to DNSCO. Suddenly, a voice behind her interrupted. "Dr. Thompson, isn't it?" Amara turned smoothly to find Vincent Carrington himself standing before her, his icy blue eyes studying her with interest. "Mr. Carrington," she said, offering a polite smile, "your collection is truly extraordinary." Carrington smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Art tells us who we are, don't you think? It reveals the truth about society, no matter how hard we try to hide it." "An interesting perspective," Amara replied, keeping her tone light. "Thank you for allowing me to attend." "Of course," Carrington said, his gaze lingering on her for a moment too long. "Enjoy the evening, Dr. Thompson." As he walked away, Amara felt a chill run down her spine. There was no doubt in her mind. Carrington suspected her presence was more than coincidence. "Harris," she whispered under her breath, "I have confirmation on the shipment, but I think Carrington's on to me." "Understood," Harris replied. "Get out now, Nightshade. We'll pull the team together for the next phase." Amara set her champagne glass down on a nearby table and began moving toward the exit, her steps calm but deliberate. She could feel eyes on her as she walked. Carrington's men were watching. The moment she stepped into the cool night air, she let out a quiet breath. She had what she needed, but Carrington was no fool. As Amara drove away from the estate, her thoughts raced. The Cleansing Order's weapons shipment was only days away, and she knew one thing for certain: stopping it would be a fight she couldn't afford to lose. The DNSCO Operations Center buzzed with energy as Amara stepped into the briefing room. Monitors flickered with maps of New York's harbor, satellite feeds, and dossiers on key players connected to the Cleansing Order. The weight of urgency hung heavy in the air. There was no time to waste. Agent Harris was already at the head of the table, pointing at a large display showing a detailed map of the Queen's docks. Director Pierce stood nearby, arms crossed, his face grim. Amara dropped into a seat and took a sip of the black coffee Harris handed her. "Nightshade," Pierce began, his tone sharp. "We've confirmed the details from Carrington's conversation. The Cleansing Order's weapons shipment will arrive in 3 days. Dock 47 in Queens, just before midnight. This is no small cache. We're talking automatic rifles, explosives, and black market tech." Amara's jaw tightened. "Enough to start a war." "Exactly," Harris said, flipping through his notes. "We've also identified the key players in the operation. Carrington's lieutenant, a man named Eric Voss, will oversee the exchange." Amara scanned Voss's photo, a bald, muscular man with a jagged scar running across his cheek. His rap sheet showed ties to extremist cells, arms trafficking, and organized crime. "Voss isn't subtle," Harris continued. "Our intel says he's brutal but efficient. He'll do whatever it takes to make sure this shipment gets delivered." Pierce leaned forward, his expression grave. "Nightshade, your mission is twofold. Intercept the shipment and gather evidence that ties Carrington to the Cleansing Order. We need proof to take him down legally. Without it, he'll walk." Amara nodded, her mind already strategizing. "What's the support team?" "You'll have a tactical team nearby," Pierce confirmed. "But you're the point of entry. Voss and his men will expect trouble, so stealth is your best option." "And if stealth fails?" Amara asked, raising an eyebrow. Pierce's expression hardened. "Neutralize the threat. Non-lethal force if possible. We can't afford collateral damage." Amara understood the unspoken message. The operation had to stay clean. Any unnecessary violence could draw media attention or compromise DNSCO's secrecy. "Understood," she said, rising to her feet. "I'll get it done." For the next 2 days, Amara prepared. She spent hours studying maps of the Queen's docks, memorizing entry points, escape routes, and potential hiding spots. She ran through every scenario in her mind, from best case to worst case outcomes. Her gear was carefully selected: a black tactical suit designed for mobility, night vision goggles, and a compact stun baton capable of disabling a target with a single strike. She carried no firearms. DNSCO's rules were clear, but her training and tools were enough to get the job done. On the third night, as the clock neared midnight, Amara stood on the rooftop of a warehouse overlooking Dock 47. The air was thick with fog, and the distant sound of waves lapping against the pier echoed through the silence. Through her earpiece, Harris's voice came through. "Nightshade, we have visual confirmation. 2 trucks just pulled up to the dock. Voss and his team are on site." Amara peered through her binoculars, spotting a group of men unloading crates from a cargo ship onto the trucks. Eric Voss stood at the center of the operation, barking orders and waving his men forward. "Looks like a full crew," Amara whispered. "At least a dozen armed guards." "Copy that," Harris replied. "Tactical team is on standby. Move when ready." Amara secured her gear and climbed down from the rooftop, moving like a shadow across the dockyard. She ducked behind stacks of shipping containers, carefully timing her movements to avoid patrols. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached the trucks. From her position, she could see Voss arguing with another man, a wiry figure holding a clipboard. "Where's the rest of the payment?" Voss growled, his voice carrying through the fog. "It's coming," the other man stammered. "Carrington's good for it, I swear." "Carrington doesn't pay, the shipment goes nowhere," Voss snapped. "Tell him that." Amara seized the moment. She slipped closer to the trucks and activated the micro camera embedded in her goggles, capturing video evidence of the transaction. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed behind her. Amara froze, her blood turning cold. One of the guards had dropped a crowbar, and the sound had alerted the others. "Who's there?" Voss shouted, spinning around. Amara cursed under her breath. Her cover was blown. "Move, Nightshade!" Harris's voice barked in her ear. Amara sprang into action. She darted between containers as bullets ricocheted off metal walls behind her. The guards shouted as they gave chase, but Amara was faster. She ducked under a steel beam and looped around, catching one of the men by surprise. A quick strike with her stun baton sent him collapsing to the ground. "Fan out!" Voss roared. "Find her!" Amara's mind raced. She needed to disable the trucks before they escaped with the weapons. Spotting the nearest vehicle, she sprinted toward it and ripped open the hood. With practiced efficiency, she pulled out a small EMP device and planted it inside. "First truck disabled," she whispered, ducking as a spray of gunfire shattered the windshield. Voss's men were closing in. Amara darted for the second truck, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She weaved through crates and equipment, taking out guards with swift, non-lethal strikes. One man lunged at her with a crowbar, but she sidestepped and swept his legs out from under him. "Nightshade, tactical team is moving in," Harris reported. "Hold your position." Amara reached the second truck and planted another EMP. Just as she secured the hood, a massive figure loomed over her. It was Voss. "You!" he growled, grabbing her arm and yanking her backward. Amara twisted, breaking his hold, but Voss was stronger than she expected. He swung a fist, grazing her shoulder and knocking her off balance. "You think you can stop this?" Voss snarled, advancing on her. "We're just getting started." Amara gritted her teeth and activated her stun baton. "Not tonight." She sidestepped his next attack and jabbed the baton into his side. Voss let out a pained grunt as the shock coursed through him, dropping him to the ground. At that moment, the sound of sirens filled the air. Tactical units swarmed the dock, surrounding the remaining guards and securing the trucks. Amara stepped back, breathing heavily as the operation came to a close. "Nightshade," Harris's voice came through. "The docks are secure. We've got the shipment, And Voss is in custody. Amara looked down at Voss, who glared up at her with pure hatred. This isn't over, he spat. Amara narrowed her eyes. We'll see about that. As she walked toward the waiting tactical team, Amara knew the mission was far from finished. Voss was just one piece of the puzzle. Carrington was still out there, and she was determined to bring him down, no matter the cost. The sun barely peeked through the gray clouds as Amara stood in DNSCO's debriefing room, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. A few hours had passed since the operation at the docks, but Amara's mind was far from at ease. Eric Voss was in custody, and the shipment of weapons had been intercepted, but it wasn't enough. Vincent Carrington was still free, and she knew his plans were far from over. Director Pierce stood at the head of the table, his sharp gaze sweeping over the team. Last night was a success. Thanks to Agent Nightshade's work, we prevented an arsenal of weapons from reaching the cleansing order. Applause rang out from a few agents, but Amara remained silent, arms crossed and eyes focused. She wasn't celebrating yet. Voss has been interrogated, Pierce continued, but he's not talking. He's too loyal, or too scared. That tells me one thing. Carrington is far more dangerous than we initially thought. Harris, seated next to Amara, spoke up. What about the shipment's origin? Who supplied the weapons? Pierce clicked a remote, and a new screen appeared, showing a map with red lines connecting ports in Eastern Europe, South America, and Africa. The shipment came through a known arms network. What's troubling is how Carrington managed to bypass international watch lists and import everything under our radar. Amara frowned. He has powerful friends, people helping him cover his tracks. Pierce nodded. And that's exactly why we're going after Carrington next. He's the head of the snake. Cut him off, and the cleansing order will collapse. Amara straightened. What's the plan? Pierce turned to her. You're going undercover again, Nightshade. This time, you'll infiltrate Carrington's inner circle. Harris raised an eyebrow. His inner circle? You mean, get close to the man himself? Exactly, Pierce said. Voss hinted, though indirectly, that Carrington has a private retreat in upstate New York. It's where he conducts business he doesn't want anyone to see. Carrington's hosting a weekend gathering for his closest allies, under the guise of a charity retreat. Amara's instinct sharpened. So I'm invited? Pierce smirked faintly. DNSCO has ensured your name made the guest list. Dr. Amara Thompson, art historian and expert on cultural artifacts, will be attending as a guest speaker. Carrington won't suspect a thing. Harris looked uneasy. You realize the risk, right? If Carrington's onto her, she'll be walking straight into the lion's den. Amara held his gaze. It's a risk I'm willing to take. We need to stop him before this escalates. Pierce's expression softened just slightly. You'll have backup. Harris and a small team will be monitoring from a safe distance. If anything goes wrong, extraction is 5 minutes out. Amara nodded. That's all I need. The following afternoon, Amara arrived at Carrington's private estate, an isolated mansion nestled deep in the forests of upstate New York. The driveway alone stretched for miles, winding through tall trees until the house revealed itself like a beast emerging from the fog. As her rented luxury car approached the entrance, Amara steeled herself. She wore a chic but understated dress, her hair styled elegantly, and her demeanor calm and poised. She was here as Dr. Amara Thompson, the art historian, intelligent, harmless, and unsuspecting. Nightshade, we're reading your signal loud and clear. Harris's voice buzzed softly in her earpiece. Stay sharp. We've mapped out the estate's layout from satellite scans. Security's tight, but predictable. Copy that, Amara replied under her breath. A uniformed attendant opened her car door, and she stepped out gracefully. Around her, other guests arrived. Men in tailored suits, women in designer dresses, all laughing and mingling. None of them had any idea what Carrington was orchestrating behind closed doors. The man himself greeted her at the top of the stone staircase. Vincent Carrington was immaculate as always, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and charismatic. "Dr. Thompson," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "It's an honor to have you here. I've heard much about your work." Amara smiled politely. "The honor is mine, Mr. Carrington. Your estate is breathtaking." Carrington's eyes lingered on her, as if searching for something beneath the surface. "Please, make yourself comfortable. We'll begin the evening's presentations after dinner." Amara nodded and stepped inside, her sharp gaze already noting everything: the positioning of guards, the placement of cameras, and the exits. Hours later, dinner was in full swing. Amara sat at one of the long dining tables surrounded by Carrington's wealthy guests. Laughter and polite conversation masked the undercurrent of something darker. Carrington sat at the head of the table, speaking with powerful men who clearly respected or feared him. As dessert was served, Carrington rose to his feet and clinked his glass. The room quieted. "My friends," he began, smiling broadly, "it's always a pleasure to gather with those who share my vision for the future. A future where strength, order, and values reclaim their place in society." The guests applauded, though Amara noted some glanced at each other nervously. "As you know," Carrington continued, "our efforts to secure this vision are well underway. Obstacles remain, of course, but soon they will fall. And when they do, we will rise." Amara felt a chill run through her. She knew exactly what he meant. Carrington wasn't just funding hate. He was building a movement, one that aimed to sow division and chaos on an unimaginable scale. Harris's voice whispered in her earpiece. "Nightshade, we're picking up encrypted comms coming from the estate. Something big's happening tonight. Stay close to Carrington." Amara set her wineglass down and stood as the guests applauded again. She made her way discreetly toward the hallway leading to Carrington's private offices. "Moving now," she whispered. The halls were dimly lit and silent, a stark contrast to the lively dining room. Amara moved quickly, slipping through an unlocked door and into Carrington's study. The room was filled with bookshelves, leather chairs, and a massive oak desk. Amara activated her micro-camera pen and began scanning documents. Maps of New York City were pinned to the walls, marked with red circles, key locations for planned disruptions. Suddenly, voices echoed from outside the door. Amara froze, her pulse spiking. "Someone's been in here," a guard's voice barked. "Check the study." "Harris," Amara whispered urgently. "They're on to me." "Nightshade, get out now," Harris replied. "I'll reroute the extraction team to the south gate." Amara scanned the room quickly, spotting a window. She darted toward it, flipping the latch and slipping out just as the door burst open behind her. The cold night air hit her like a wave, but she didn't stop. She sprinted across the grounds, ducking through shadows and weaving between hedges as guards shouted behind her. Spotlights flared to life, sweeping the grounds in search of her. "Extraction team, I'm en route to the south gate," Amara said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. Through the trees, she saw the outline of a black SUV waiting. As bullets whipped past her, Amara pushed herself harder, diving into the vehicle just as it screeched forward. "Go, go, go!" Harris shouted from the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel. Amara slumped back in her seat, breathing heavily. She glanced out the rear window as Carrington's estate disappeared into the distance. "We've got what we need," she said quietly. "Carrington's planning something huge, and we're running out of time." Harris nodded grimly. "Then we'll stop him, one way or another." Amara clenched her fists, determination burning in her eyes. The fight was far from over, and Carrington would soon learn that he'd underestimated her for the last time. The black SUV hummed quietly as it sped down the back roads, leaving Carrington's estate far behind. Inside, Amara sat in the passenger seat, her mind racing as Harris drove in tense silence. The stolen documents and footage she'd captured were safely encrypted and transmitted to DNSCO's servers, but the weight of what she had seen lingered. "Those red circles on Carrington's map," she said, breaking the silence. "They weren't random. Major subway stations, power grids, public centers. He's planning synchronized attacks across the city." Harris tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. "If those locations go down, New York will be in chaos. That's exactly what Carrington wants: panic, fear, and division. He'll use the cleansing order to fan the flames and swoop in while the city burns." Amara stared out the window, the dark forest blurring past. "How much time do we have?" "Not enough." Harris glanced at her briefly. "Pierce wants you back at HQ immediately. We need to map out a counterattack and get this intel to city authorities before it's too late." An hour later, Amara walked into DNSCO headquarters, the entire operations center alive with urgency. Director Pierce stood at the front of the war room, surrounded by analysts and agents hunched over monitors. Red pins dotted a massive map of New York City, mirroring the locations she'd seen in Carrington's study. "Nightshade," Pierce said as she approached, his expression tight. "You did good work, but this isn't over. Carrington's plan is bigger than we thought." "What's the timeline?" Amara asked, folding her arms. Pierce gestured to the map. "Based on Voss's communications and the intel you retrieved, the attacks are set to begin tomorrow night, midnight. He's targeting critical infrastructure, subways, bridges, power grids. If even a fraction of these plans succeed, the city will be crippled." The room fell silent. Amara's pulse quickened. "We can't let that happen." Pierce nodded firmly. "We won't. Here's the plan. DNSCO will coordinate with local law enforcement to secure each target. Our tactical teams will be stationed at high-risk areas, ready to intercept any cleansing order activity." Harris chimed in. "And you, Nightshade, will lead the final phase of this operation." Amara arched a brow. "Final phase?" Pierce stepped closer, his voice low but resolute. "Carrington has no idea we've pieced this together. While the teams dismantle the cleansing order's cells across the city, you're going after Carrington himself. We've tracked him to a penthouse suite downtown. He's holed up there, likely coordinating the entire operation." Amara's mind locked into focus. "You want me to bring him in?" "Alive," Pierce said. "We need him to talk. Without his confession, this whole operation could get buried under red tape. We need proof that links him to the cleansing order's attacks." Amara nodded, determination hardening in her gaze. "I'll get it done." That evening, the sun sank behind the skyline, casting New York City in shadows. Amara stood on the rooftop of a neighboring skyscraper, her tactical suit blending into the night. Across the way, Carrington's penthouse glowed with warm lights, the glass windows revealing glimpses of his expansive modern living room. Through her earpiece, Harris's voice crackled. "Nightshade, you're clear to move. Tactical teams have eyes on the targets. We'll intercept the cleansing order before midnight." "Copy that," Amara replied. She secured her grappling line to the ledge and aimed it at the penthouse's balcony. The line shot across with a whir, latching onto the steel railing. Amara exhaled slowly, then leapt into the air. The wind rushed past her as she zipped across the chasm, landing softly on the balcony with practiced grace. She crouched low, scanning the room. Carrington sat in a leather chair by the window, a phone pressed to his ear, his face illuminated by the city lights. "Yes," he said, his voice cold and clipped. "Everything is in place. The teams are ready, and by tomorrow morning, this city will be ours to reshape. No one will stand in our way." Amara's eyes narrowed. She activated the micro camera in her goggles, recording every word. Suddenly, Carrington paused, his sharp gaze snapping toward the balcony as if sensing her presence. Amara froze, but it was too late. "I'll call you back," Carrington said, standing up. He set the phone down and strode toward the balcony door, his expression hard. Amara slipped to the side, pressing herself against the wall as Carrington stepped outside, his eyes scanning the shadows. "I know you're here," he said softly, his voice dripping with confidence. "Did you really think you could stop this? That you could stop me?" Amara struck. She stepped out from the shadows and grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back with a forceful maneuver. Carrington grunted in pain as she shoved him against the glass. "You've already lost," Amara said, her voice ice-cold. "Your men are being taken down as we speak. The city will stand, and you'll fall." Carrington let out a low, bitter laugh. "You think this ends with me? You think taking me in will change anything?" Amara tightened her grip. "We'll see what you have to say when you're behind bars." Suddenly, a crash echoed from inside the penthouse. Amara glanced back to see 3 of Carrington's guards rushing toward her, guns drawn. "Move, Nightshade!" Harris's voice barked in her ear. Carrington seized the moment. He twisted free of her grip and shoved her backward, sending her stumbling against the railing. Amara recovered quickly, ducking as a bullet shattered the glass above her head. She dove back into the penthouse, using the room's furniture as cover. The guards fired relentlessly, but Amara moved like lightning, disarming one with a swift kick and taking down another with her stun baton. Carrington bolted for the elevator. Amara spotted him just as the doors began to close. "Harris, I'm in pursuit," she shouted, sprinting across the room. "Units are on the ground," Harris replied. "Don't let him get away." Amara darted into the emergency stairwell, her boots pounding against the steps as she raced downward. Her breathing was steady, her focus razor-sharp. She couldn't let Carrington escape, not now. Suddenly, her earpiece crackled with Pierce's voice. "Nightshade, listen carefully. Carrington's trying to flee through the underground garage. Cut him off before he reaches the tunnel." "Understood." Amara pushed herself harder, her muscles screaming in protest as she descended floor after floor. Bursting into the garage, she spotted Carrington climbing into a black SUV, his driver gunning the engine. Amara sprinted forward, drawing her baton and hurling it at the vehicle's windshield. The glass cracked with a loud thud, forcing the driver to swerve. Carrington cursed and flung open the door, attempting to flee on foot. Amara tackled him before he could get far, pinning him to the concrete floor. "It's over," she said, breathing hard. Carrington glared up at her, his silver hair disheveled and his face twisted in fury. "You have no idea what's coming," he hissed. The sound of sirens filled the air as tactical units swarmed the garage. Harris appeared, leading the charge. He grabbed Carrington by the arm and hauled him to his feet. "We'll see how tough you are in a holding cell," Harris said grimly. Amara stood, her chest heaving, as she watched the officers secure Carrington in handcuffs. Relief washed over her, but she knew the fight wasn't finished. Carrington's words echoed in her mind. "You have no idea what's coming." As the SUV carrying Carrington sped away, Amara turned to Harris. "This isn't over." Harris nodded, his expression grim. "No, but we've got him now, and that's a start." Amara looked back at the skyline, the city she had fought to protect. The battle was far from won, but tonight they had struck a blow against the darkness. The DNSCO interrogation room was as sterile and cold as any Amara had ever seen. Vincent Carrington sat at the steel table, his wrists cuffed, his face still a mask of quiet arrogance. Despite his disheveled appearance from the night before, his silver hair remained slicked back, and his sharp blue eyes bore no hint of fear. Amara stood on the other side of the one-way mirror, observing him. Beside her, Director Pierce and Agent Harris watched in silence. "He's too calm," Amara muttered. "It's like he's still in control." Pierce crossed his arms, his face unreadable. "He's arrogant, but he's also dangerous. Men like him always have contingency plans." Harris exhaled sharply. "We've got him on conspiracy charges, possession of illegal arms, and enough evidence to bury him for life." but we need more. He's the key to dismantling the cleansing order and whoever else is backing them. Amara nodded, her jaw tightening. Then it's time to get him talking. Pierce glanced at her. Are you sure? He knows you were the one who brought him in. He might try to play you. Amara's gaze hardened as she locked eyes with Carrington through the glass. Let him try. The door to the interrogation room creaked as Amara entered. Carrington's eyes flicked up to meet hers, and a faint smile curled at the corner of his lips. He looked relaxed, as though he were hosting a dinner party rather than sitting in custody. Well, he said softly. Dr. Amara Thompson, or should I call you Agent Nightshade? You really do wear many hats. Amara pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. She placed a folder on the table but didn't open it. You can call me whatever you like, Carrington. You'll have plenty of time to think about names in federal prison. Carrington chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. Prison? You think that's where I'll end up? That's exactly where you're headed, Amara replied coolly. We intercepted your weapons shipment. We dismantled your cleansing order cells. Your empire is falling apart, and you're sitting in a government black site with nowhere to go. Carrington leaned forward slightly, his cuffed hands resting on the table. You think I'm the one pulling all the strings? You think this ends with me? Amara's expression didn't waver. You want me to believe there's someone else? Fine. Give me a name. Carrington smiled faintly, his calm demeanor unshaken. Oh, Agent, you wouldn't believe me even if I told you. There are forces at work far beyond what you or your precious agency can understand. I'm just a piece on the board, a very valuable piece, mind you, but a piece nonetheless. Amara's fists clenched under the table. She'd interrogated men like him before, powerful individuals who thought they were untouchable, always trying to manipulate the conversation. But she wasn't biting. You can play games all you want, she said, but your people are being rounded up as we speak. You're alone now, Carrington. No one is coming to save you. Carrington's smile faltered just slightly, but his confidence didn't crack. You've stopped nothing. All you've done is delay the inevitable. The cleansing order is only the beginning, Agent Nightshade. What's coming next will reshape this city and the world. And when it happens, you'll wish you had listened. Listen to what? Amara pressed, leaning in. You're just another man hiding behind money and hate, thinking you're untouchable. But you're not. You're finished. Carrington's expression darkened, and for the first time, the mask of calm slipped. Am I? Then you should ask yourself something, Agent. Why is it so quiet out there? Amara froze. The faint hum of DNSKO headquarters, usually alive with activity, seemed eerily still. Harris's voice crackled through her earpiece, sharp and tense. Nightshade, we've got a situation. Security systems are glitching. Cameras are down across the East Wing. We think it's... The lights in the room flickered. Then everything went dark. Amara shot to her feet, her instincts screaming danger. Harris! Pierce! Static filled her earpiece. Carrington leaned back in his chair, a slow, sinister smile spreading across his face. Ah, right on schedule. The emergency lights flared to life, bathing the halls of DNSCO headquarters in a deep red glow. Amara burst out of the interrogation room, her hand instinctively going for the stun baton at her belt. The once secure facility was now a maze of chaos. Sirens blared, agents shouted, and the unmistakable sound of gunfire echoed from somewhere deep within the building. Harris! Amara shouted, dodging around a corner. Nightshade! Harris's voice crackled back to life. We're under attack! It's an inside breach! They're here for Carrington! Amara's blood ran cold. Who's they? Cleansing order operatives. They've infiltrated the building. Amara gritted her teeth, adrenaline surging through her veins. She sprinted toward the security center, where Harris and Pierce had regrouped with a handful of agents. The screens were lit up with chaos. Masked gunmen storming through hallways, overwhelming security checkpoints. "Where's Carrington?" Amara demanded. "Still in the interrogation room," Harris replied. "But they won't stop until they get to him. He's their last card." Director Pierce slammed a fist on the table. "We underestimated them. They planned this attack as a fallback." Amara grabbed her stun baton and turned toward the door. "Then we end it here. Lock the facility down. I'll secure Carrington." "Nightshade, wait!" Pierce called, but Amara was already gone. The halls were a battlefield. Amara moved swiftly and silently, taking out cleansing order operatives as she advanced toward the interrogation wing. Her baton crackled with electricity as she struck down two masked men, their weapons clattering to the floor. She could hear more gunfire ahead and picked up her pace. Finally, she reached the corridor leading to the interrogation room, only to see the door blown off its hinges. Smoke billowed from the entryway. "No!" Amara breathed, rushing forward. Inside, the room was empty. The chair where Carrington had sat was overturned, and his cuffs lay discarded on the floor. A gaping hole in the wall led to a maintenance tunnel, a clear escape route. "Harris!" Amara shouted into her earpiece. "Carrington's gone. He's escaping through the tunnels." "We're on it," Harris replied. "Units are deploying to cut him off." Amara sprinted into the tunnel, the sound of her footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. The air was thick and damp, and ahead she could hear voices, Carrington and his operatives. "Move faster!" Carrington barked. Amara's heart pounded as she rounded the corner, spotting Carrington climbing into a black van idling at the tunnel's end. She sprinted forward, every muscle in her body burning. "Carrington!" she shouted. He turned, his face illuminated by the van's headlights. "Goodbye, Agent Nightshade." The van sped off, tires screeching against the concrete. Amara skidded to a stop, breathing hard as the vehicle disappeared into the darkness. Harris's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Nightshade, talk to me!" Amara's fists clenched. "Carrington's gone." There was a pause. Then Harris replied, his voice low and grim. "We'll get him back, but this isn't over." Amara stared into the empty tunnel, determination burning in her chest. She had stopped Carrington's plan once, but now he was free, and he was far from finished. "I'll hunt him down," she said softly, "no matter where he runs." The city buzzed with tension. News stations ran stories of attempted domestic terrorism disrupted by federal forces, carefully sanitized to avoid panic. Most New Yorkers went about their day, unaware of the chaos that had nearly consumed them. But for Amara, the weight of unfinished business hung heavy. Vincent Carrington was still out there. DNSCO had locked down New York's infrastructure, dismantled remaining cleansing order cells, and secured the city's most critical locations. Yet the man orchestrating it all had vanished like smoke. Amara sat alone in DNSCO's dark briefing room, staring at a map of New York projected onto the wall. Her mind raced through possibilities. "Where are you hiding, Carrington?" The door opened, and Harris stepped in, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You've been at this for hours," he said, handing her one. "Pierce wants you to stand down for the night." Amara shook her head, her expression resolute. "I can't. He's out there, Harris. He's planning something else. I know it." Harris sighed, lowering himself into the chair beside her. "We've searched his properties, tracked his associates, interrogated every cleansing order member we caught. The trail's gone cold." Amara leaned forward, her eyes locked on the map. "Carrington's too smart to leave loose ends. He's hiding somewhere off the grid, somewhere he thinks we won't look." Harris watched her closely. "You think he has another safe house?" "Not just any safe house," Amara replied. "He needs somewhere isolated, somewhere he can regroup and plan his next move." She tapped the map, her finger hovering over the outskirts of the city. "The Catskills." Harris raised an eyebrow. "The mountains?" Think about it, Amara said, her mind sharpening with clarity. Carrington's rich, connected, and meticulous. He'd want a place remote enough to avoid detection, but close enough to maintain communication with his network. The Catskills are full of private retreats and empty estates, perfect for a man like him to disappear. Harris leaned back, considering. It's a stretch. It's a lead, Amara countered, already grabbing her gear, and we don't have time to wait for another one. Harris sighed, shaking his head. I'll tell Pierce, but I'm coming with you. Amara allowed herself the faintest smile. I was hoping you'd say that. Hours later, the DNSCO-issued SUV rumbled through winding mountain roads, cutting through thick fog that clung to the trees. The Catskills were silent, dark, and cold, a stark contrast to the city's restless energy. Amara sat in the passenger seat, scanning satellite images on a tablet. There, she said, pointing to a clearing on the screen. An abandoned lodge near Raven Peak, owned by a shell company tied to one of Carrington's associates. Harris squinted through the windshield as the headlights illuminated the overgrown driveway. Looks like nobody's been here in years. Exactly, Amara replied, unbuckling her seatbelt. That's what he wants us to think. The SUV rolled to a stop, and Amara and Harris stepped out into the cold night air. The lodge loomed ahead, its once grand structure now weathered and surrounded by shadow. Light flickered faintly from one of the upper windows, a sure sign of life. Harris muttered, "We've got company." Amara nodded, crouching low as she led the way toward the building. The faint crunch of their boots on frost-covered leaves was the only sound. Amara's heart pounded in her chest, her senses dialed to their sharpest edge. "Nightshade, hold up," Harris whispered, pointing to a set of tire tracks leading to the side of the lodge. "Two vehicles. He's not alone." Amara exhaled slowly. "Then we'll handle it." Inside the lodge, the air was thick with dust and tension. Amara and Harris moved like shadows through the darkened halls, their stun weapons at the ready. From a distant room, muffled voices echoed, Carrington's unmistakable tone among them. Amara motioned for Harris to follow as she crept toward the source of the sound. Peering through a cracked door, she spotted Carrington standing near a large table covered in maps and documents. Two armed men flanked him, clearly his remaining loyalists. "This city failed to listen," Carrington was saying, his voice cold and sharp. "But it doesn't matter. Phase 2 will succeed. They won't stop us." Amara tapped her earpiece. "We've got eyes on Carrington. 3 targets total. Harris, take the one on the left." "On it," Harris whispered. Amara slipped through the door like a shadow. In one fluid motion, she struck the first guard with her stun baton, sending him collapsing to the ground. Harris followed suit, taking down the second guard with a quick, precise blow. Carrington spun around, fury flashing in his icy blue eyes. "You again?" "Did you really think I wouldn't find you?" Amara said, advancing slowly. Carrington stepped back, his calm veneer finally cracking. "You don't understand what's coming, Agent Nightshade. Taking me down changes nothing. Others will rise. You're fighting a losing battle." Amara shook her head. "You've already lost." Carrington lunged for a pistol lying on the table, but Amara was faster. She grabbed his wrist, twisting the weapon from his hand and pinning him against the wall. "Your operation is finished," she said, her voice low and unwavering. "Your people are scattered, your plans exposed. It's over, Carrington." He glared at her, his face a mask of rage. "You think this ends here? There will always be men like me. Men who see the truth while the rest of you cling to your illusions of peace." Amara leaned closer, her gaze cutting through him. "Then I'll stop every single one of you." Harris stepped forward, cuffs in hand. "Vincent Carrington, you're under arrest for conspiracy, terrorism, and arms trafficking. You'll be spending the rest of your life in a cell." Carrington didn't resist, as Harris secured the cuffs around his wrists, but his expression remained defiant. "You'll see," he muttered. "You'll see soon enough." Amara exchanged a glance with Harris. "Take him." As the sun began to rise, painting the Catskills in shades of orange and gold, Amara stood outside the lodge, breathing in the cold morning air. The tactical team loaded Carrington into a secure vehicle, his empire in ruins. Harris approached, rubbing his hands together against the chill. "It's done. Carrington's finished. DNSKO is cleaning up the rest of the cells as we speak." Amara nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "It's a victory, but this isn't the end." Harris frowned. "You think he's right? That there's more out there?" Amara turned to face him, her expression resolute. "There will always be people like him, men who exploit fear and division for their own gain. But as long as they exist, we'll be here to stop them." Harris smiled faintly. "You're not wrong. One battle at a time, huh?" Amara allowed herself the smallest smile. "Exactly." Together, they watched as the convoy carrying Carrington disappeared down the mountain road, the first rays of sunlight breaking through the trees. For now, the city was safe, and as long as Amara Thompson, Agent Nightshade, was on the front lines, it always would be.